can you tell us a little bit more about your background? And you spoke a little bit about your mom being an immigrant. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So my mom came to this country having survived 5 years in 7 different Nazi camps, and met my dad, who was an American GI, also from an immigrant family. And when I started public school, it was clear that it was her education as well as mine, and that's when she learned English, and that's when she learned to be literate in English, and develop the love of reading, but kind of by looking over my shoulder. And so I think that my deep abiding faith in the power of education really came from that, because I have seen that education changes lives, changed my life. And in particular, free education, public education, affordable education was absolutely essential. And it was essential for me all the way right through graduate school.
Yeah. And so, I agree with that, although I didn't discover that until much later, until I joined the Macaulay Honors Program and then did Teach for America. I think previous to that, I was just kind of a little absent-minded when it came to sort of learning and education, and didn't really understand how to learn. And I think that's one of the things that we're lacking in the education system, is that because we have such a heavy credentialing system, and we have such a heavy, focus on testing and certifications and things like that, it's not quite about learning how to learn. It's about sort of, learning how to get the right grades. And I think that is, changing a little bit now with, portfolio-based assessments and with project-based learning and things like that, but we're not quite there yet. And the last time you and I talked, we talked about how, universities are a little bit more sort of lecture-based and assessment-based and credentialing-based. So where do you think universities need to go in order to really produce the kind of human that we really want, leading in this world?
I think we don't really understand how people learn. We don't, it's a black box, and we substituted credentials for, any sort of real cognitive science that would say to us, oh, someone actually learned something. And so it was easier to say, well, you have a degree, so a degree must certify it. It's like that moment in The Wizard of Oz when, the wizard gives, I guess it's the scarecrow, a sheepskin, and says, oh, you're really very smart. Here's your sheepskin, as if this external validation is a substitute for anything. And of course, we know that the scarecrow was really very wise, and so he didn't even need that sheepskin. But anyway, I digress. So I think that that this is an area where technology and greater understanding of cognitive science will really help us. I think that we will be able to really assess skills in a much smarter way. I watch how doctors train doctors, and it to me it's very meaningful that they have a system of one doctor trainee watches another doctor, then the new doctor does it himself or herself, and then the new doctor begins to implement it and become a teacher themselves. And so that experiential piece, I think, is absolutely critical. Although this year as an interim president was often excruciating, when I've been asked, I've only been the ex-interim president of Hunter College for 2 weeks, but over the course of these 2 weeks, when people say to me, are you sorry you did it? I look at them like they're crazy. Of course I'm not sorry that I did it, because I learned so much. So for me, learning is almost an absolute good. Even when you learn things that are difficult and painful, you're still growing, you're still changing, you're still evolving. And that strikes me as a wonderful thing. So I think universities are beginning to understand that they have to do much more and provide those kinds of experiences for students, but it's so slow. It's so slow. And there was an article just this week about Northeastern's co-op program and how wonderful it is. And I agree. I've always been a huge admirer of what they do. But what they've done is greatly increase the number of students who apply to Northeastern, which means that the number of students who get in is getting lower and lower. And they think that's a good thing because now they're more competitive. And I keep thinking, well, why didn't somebody, and I'm not picking on Northeastern, but why didn't somebody say, wow, I wonder how we could serve twice as many students and get those good outcomes? And that's where I think the shift in technology and in attitudes will be so helpful, because we need to find ways to make higher education more affordable, which means we need to make teachers, we need to prize their work, and we need to make them more scalable.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And, you know, what you talked about earlier, the concept of growth mindset and creating really, you know, skills that are vocational and, you know, relevant in real life, that really does contribute to, you know, how students can actually develop a really strong purpose in life. So I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of Ikigai, the Japanese concept. It's been, you know, westernized a little bit, but for the context of this conversation, it's a 4-quadrant sort of framework where, you know, it basically says if you can meet these 4 quadrants, then you will have found your purpose in life. And so one of the quadrants is about finding your talent, so what you're really good at. Another quadrant is finding what you are passionate about. Another quadrant is finding what the world needs from you. And the 4th quadrant is finding what you can actually make money off of. And so if you get all 4 of those quadrants, then you can really find your purpose. But I think a lot of us are kind of stuck in the what we're good at and what we can make money off of, which is really the vocational piece. But we, you know, move away from the passion and the work, what the world needs, or we do some other combination of those 4 quadrants, and it's not really quite, you know, contributing your full purpose to the world. And I think what you're talking about really does like allude back to that Ikigai concept.
I have to tell you, I feel like I have lived that concept, because when I think back on things that I've done, there have been times when the mission has predominated. There have been times when my own abilities have predominated. There have been times when making money was the, you know, and when I talk to, particularly to graduate students about their careers, I do try to say, when you can hit all those things at one time, then it really sings. And I've been extraordinarily lucky. And I feel like lots of times I've been able to hit all those chimes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I've been fortunate enough to be in that sort of position too. But I think we have to create our own opportunities there, right? Like, I think if we are pursuing things just from one perspective, from like the money-making perspective or just the passion perspective, and you're not seeing that entire picture, then it does get a little harder. And I think about, you know, programs that are like entirely business oriented or programs that are entirely arts oriented, and we kind of lose the sort of, you know, full picture there. Like, you know, I have my sister-in-law is an artist, and she very early on was just like, I need to learn business skills in order to be able to learn how to sell my art, because if I don't learn that, then I'm not going to be able to pursue my passions. And so she did a really good job at sort of like pursuing that. But I think a lot of artists are sort of in this place where they're like, I'm a starving artist, but like, does that really need to be the case? You know, you can actually be a successful artist if you wanted to be, but I think you really have to learn those skills. And I think a lot of programs don't quite provide that. Yeah, go ahead.
Even just taking one step back, really what you're saying and what those quadrants help us do is to think in intentional ways about careers. And I think I would make the argument that in previous generations, you didn't really have to do that. You didn't have to do that because you could sort of stumble around and find your way into, you know, kind of what made sense for you. There were lots of entry paths that you could try on, and for people who came from, you know, middle class and upper middle class families, there were lots of role models that you could observe and say, oh, so that's what a pharmacist does, and oh, that's what a teacher does. So you could observe all of those things. You fast forward to today, and the situation is dramatically different. It's a much, much more competitive world. AI and other things are hollowing out all of those entry-level positions. And if you don't start out there's lots of research around this, if you don't start out in some sort of a first rung of the ladder, chances are that 10 years later, you still will not be getting where you wanted to go, where you thought you should go, and where society ideally would want you to go. So I think one of the things that that we need to do when we think about post-secondary education is we need to make that concept of choosing a career and getting some experiential experience, getting your feet wet, understanding what role models you might want to observe through internships or apprenticeships. We have to lean into that as part of what happens to you in college.
Yeah, totally agree. And maybe even start in high school, right? So that you can have a better on-ramp into college. So last time we talked, you had said that this is the most fluid moment in higher education, and it's a little bit scary. And all the things that you just said sort of paint a picture of like what a university should be thinking about in order to succeed in the age of AI or in the sort of future that's coming for us. There's a concept in K-12 that we talked about last time, which is called the portrait of a graduate. And the portrait of a graduate basically identifies the competencies that graduates would need in order to be successful after they graduate from high school. And so at Ed3 DAO, we've been thinking about portraits across the spectrum. So what is the portrait of a teacher? What is the portrait of a leader? What is the portrait of an institute? And so if you could bring together all the things that you just told me about that you think universities should really be prioritizing, what would you say the portrait of a university should be?
The opposite of an ivory tower. So an ivory tower is distinct from society. It's away from society. It has a moat around it, and it wants to kind of hold the world at bay. I think the time that we spend in college is beautiful and should be protected as a special moment. But I think it should be much more porous to the outside world. And that process of being porous, of being integrated, needs to be across the board in who teaches and what they teach and what happens in the classroom and how we implement pedagogy and how we implement technology and what we think about career services and how that gets integrated into the classroom. So it's kind of the free flow of ideas and opportunities that has to happen at all levels of an institution, and that's the kind of institution I would think going forward will take advantage of the good things that are fluid about this moment and avoid some of the bad things. I don't think universities are going to go away, but as the almost the default for what a high school student should be thinking about, I think there's a danger that they could be marginalized and that lots of other things could swarm in there to take their place.
Yeah, and how far do you think current universities are from this portrait that you have painted here?
I think there's a handful of universities that are headed in the right direction. I do think co-op education is a great idea. I do think that a focus on interdisciplinarity and the needs of contemporary society, I think those are great ideas. And I think a place like Arizona State University, where I'm privileged to spend a lot of time, I think they are really clear about those things. there are wonderful things happening there's probably a wonderful thing happening at every college in the United States. It's that, how do you roll that all up into a vision? I recently, for a piece that I've been working on, I recently read a lot of mission statements of colleges and universities. They're interchangeable for the most part. They all sound alike, really, generalities about teaching and scholarship and research. And yes, universities are about teaching and scholarship and research. But I think in the lack of differentiation is a real tell that nobody has thought it was worth their while to sit down and say, are we different? If we are, how are we different? And what is our portrait of a student, that we want our students to acquire at our institution? And, to me, it's all about being an agile learner and figuring out how what you want to learn it, apply it, think about it, debunk it, change it, extend it, change your mind. Universities, I think if I could put a big blanket over universities, I would say they are places where we should learn to change our mind. Because we should have learned things that disturbed us and provoked us and made us think in different ways. And if we go out exactly the same way that we went in, with just a bunch of facts stuffed into our brains, then we haven't learned how to learn. Because learning to learn, to me, is all about change.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And, that also makes me think that oftentimes we have these aspirations for our students, and we have these, graduate profiles or whatever it is. And we say in our mission statements that we want our kids to be global citizens or whatever it is. But like I'm not always seeing the sort of the alignment between what the university actually does and actually teaches, and how they hire professors and things like that, to what they're actually trying to accomplish. And there's a lot of misalignment between what they say they'll do and what they're actually producing. So let's take this portrait concept even further, and let's talk about at Ed3 DAO, we talk a lot about the portrait of a teacher in K-12 education. What does a portrait need to be for the age of AI, for emerging tech, for what our kids need to become for the future. So what would you say the portrait of a professor needs to be, especially because there's a lot of controversy around tenure and around professors sort of just sort of meeting the status quo because they can. So, tell me a little bit more about portrait of a professor, and potentially also what might we do to get closer to that portrait? Because right now, I think there's a lot of bureaucratic systems that sort of allow professors to potentially not, try that hard sometimes.
Well, we might as well start out by saying that the incentive structure for professors is not designed to make them care about the institution they teach in, to make them care about student success, and even to remain really productive in their field as scholars and researchers. Everything is designed to get you to tenure, and then you're at the top of the mountain, and you can open up a beach chair and just sit down and admire the view. And listen, that's not the overwhelming majority of faculty members, but I used to ask faculty members at Hunter what the graduation rate of the university was. They would often say that's not their job. So then sometimes I would change the aperture a little bit and say, well, what's the graduation rate in your department? What kinds of jobs do your students get if they major in whatever it is? They have no idea, and they, for the most part, really don't think it is their job. So to me, the portrait of a professor is someone who has tremendous domain expertise, and has made the decision that he or she is not going to work in a think tank, and not going to work in a research lab, but in a university, and that makes you a citizen of the university and a citizen of society, because society supports universities. So, it's kind of back to your quadrants again. What does society need you to do? Society needs you to advance your research because it has value to the world. But then you also need to take your responsibility as a teacher and as a participant in an academic community really seriously. And that means you do need to care about what happens to your students after they leave your classroom. So to me, it's that combination of domain expertise and then looking at students not only as performers in your class, but as people who are going to go on and have a life that will be enriched by what happened in your class. And are you really focusing on that?
Yeah. And that also, to me, it reminds me of futurist thinking. Are you familiar with like futurism? And I think the most practical form of futurism is to really think about where your students or where you will be in 10 years. And I think oftentimes when we're even in K-12 education, we think about, okay, well, I'm going to make sure my kids are successful by the end of the year or successful by the end of graduation. But to really, set students up for success, you want to think about where they will be in 10 years. And I think with, colleges and universities, that becomes even more important because that's really where they start learning, their purpose or Ikigai and, how they can actually leverage their skills to be successful in the future. But you're right, we don't often think about that. And you're saying that we don't even think about it, in terms of graduation rates. So that's not a great place for us to be.
I used to have I had a second grade teacher, Mrs. Nevins. I remember Mrs. Nevins at PS 148, Jackson Heights, Queens, who would invite students to come and sit next to me on the bench, because if you sit next to me on the bench, you're going to go to college. And let's just look at this book together and whatever. And I don't know what in her head, the bench and the college, how that all sort of whatever. But I know that I remember it, right? And I remember that, somebody's thinking about my future.
Yeah.
I actually don't even remember my parents ever talking about college, but I remember Mrs. Nevins talking about college. So it's kind of
That's
interesting.
lovely. Yeah. I mean, educators make such a huge impact on people's lives. And I think, which is crazy to think, right? Because educators are so disrespected and are so undervalued, and yet they are touching every single life on the planet, and they are responsible for the success and the new professions that are created and the new careers that are created for almost every single person on the planet. So it's kind of crazy to me that we undervalue that profession so much.
Well, we do. And one thing I saw this year, I guess I would put this in the category of things I learned that I wish I hadn't learned, is that for some faculty, the imposition of their own political points of view on their students, that seems to them to be perfectly reasonable. And for a math teacher to be taking sides in a global conflict, well, it's what I think. So why shouldn't I be able to say it or express it on my T-shirt or in my social media, without respecting the fact that you are a great influence, that you are the person who will be assessing that student, giving them a grade, potentially a recommendation. How does the student feel if the person who's doing all of that assessment, has basically said, your point of view is immoral or unethical or evil in some way. So this is, I think we need to find a new balance between free expression and letting students have free expression. There's a balance there that I don't think this year demonstrated that we really have understood.
Yeah, and to be honest, I'm not sure we're going to get there. There's a famous E.O. Wilson quote, we function in a society where humans are still operating on emotions that are Paleolithic and institutions that are medieval and with godlike technology. And so like that Paleolithic emotions part, like I'm not sure we're going to necessarily get past that no matter how advanced we get. And I think, you know, understandably so, educators also want to be able to express themselves, but it's also balancing it with the power that they have over students that they're, you know, that they're teaching. So it's a little bit of a balance that I'm not sure we're actually going to be able to get to. And, you know, it might just be something that we have to deal with in a different way.
Yeah, you know, we're gonna replace the values behind what you just said with regulation and with laws and with saying, okay, it's you can fire somebody if they do that. You know, and I think it's the wrong approach. You know, I think having a, you know, an agreed to framework that says, yes, you can do that, but should you do that? And, you know, being more sort of self-regulated, I would much rather see that approach taken. But, you know, I think we're going to have a very rough year this year, you know, coming up with no great resolution in the Middle East. And, you know, I think it's just going to be a year of the same. So I worry about that.
Yeah. Let's switch the topic a little bit. It's still on the same tangent, but you have a background in media and in technology. So tell us a little bit more about your background, and then let's connect that to some of this higher education stuff.
When I left as a fresh PhD in English literature with a strong focus on the Victorian novel, it was very hard to find a job in any place that I would choose to live in. And so I answered an ad in the New York Times for, it didn't even say what the job was. It was just basically, come join the wonderful world of cable television. It was the very early days of cable television. And I didn't even know what that was. You know, all we knew about, well, anyway, I won't go down there. But anyway, so I did get a job, and I discovered I would call it a love of storytelling and how technology changes storytelling. And so the shift from broadcast television to cable television to satellite television to streaming services, all of this to me was about how we tell stories in new ways, how we change content, and commerce, because commerce came along with that as well. So so I didn't start out thinking that I loved technology, although I do remember even when I was a graduate student at Princeton, I remember somebody coming in showing us how they had put their dissertation on punch cards and how it was all, you know, perfect margins, and how he could change it without having to, you know, cross something out on a piece of paper and retype it. And I remember thinking, wow, that is just amazing. And then I saw data flowing through an acoustic coupler, and I thought, whoa, look at those things. So I do have a love of technology. I could geek out on that for a while. So I just followed the technology as it changed, and that eventually brought me to, of all places, the National Football League, where we began to tell the story of football in new ways, using the internet. This was the very early days of the internet, and I had a lot of fun there. And I started thinking, I wonder how this shift in technology will change my first love, which was education. And so I started working on something that would utilize the content of a university, but project it out into the virtual world on the internet. And I started doing that work right around the same time that Columbia University, the trustees at Columbia University, sort of woke up one day and said, what is this internet thing going to mean for Columbia University? So they went looking for somebody who could lead a strategic plan for the university at the same time that I was at the NFL trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And we found each other. And so I left the NFL, which, people thought I was totally crazy for doing, but 7 Super Bowls were enough for me. And I went to Columbia, and out of that came one of the very early online learning ventures. I mean, this was 1999, and so I've been at the virtual world of learning for a long time. And that was what brought me back into my first love, into education. And when that venture folded, I had met the chancellor of the City University of New York, and I went to visit with him about what I was going to do next. And he said, "Wait a minute, you have a PhD, right?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, would you be interested in becoming dean of our honors college?" And I don't think I knew anything about honors colleges, and I certainly didn't think that I was going to go work for a traditional university, because at Columbia, all I was doing was working on the digital side. But Matthew Goldstein is a very smart man, and he said, okay, I know you don't want to do it, but I'd like to set you up just for a couple of meetings. And he introduced me to a couple of students, and like me, they were from immigrant families, and like me, they had gone to public school, and like me, they were strivers and saw college as an opportunity to just reinvent themselves and move in different ways. And so little by little, actually it wasn't even little by little, it was like in one fell swoop, I fell in love, and that's what brought me back into traditional education. But I would say that this focus on media and technology helped me to understand that things don't change. We don't have 3 broadcast networks to the exclusion of everything else. We have, a gazillion streaming services and miniseries and the ability to stop and start a TV show whenever we want. Things change, and change has been very slow in coming to higher education, largely because of, I think, the credentialing factor. But I do think that higher education is vulnerable, which is why I feel this moment is so important.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you have experienced all of this technological change over time, and I think firsthand how impactful technology can be to humans, to society, all of that. And then you said, higher education or institutions are not actually, as quick to change on that. Isn't that highly detrimental to the organization and to the institution to not adopt that change? So let's talk about AI or social media or any of the above, where we're seeing huge impact on, not just young students, but older students and adults because of social media and how it's impacting their sense of self and their ability to be able to operate in society. And then with AI, we have tremendous opportunity with AI, tremendous threats with AI, but I'm not seeing a lot of universities really adopting AI in a way that's like being infused into everything they're doing. There's maybe like a class here or two, maybe there's a major that was developed, but like AI is one of those things where, just like the internet, it's going to become so ubiquitous, it's going to have to be integrated into everything we do. So what's your perspective of that? And how are you thinking about what universities might be needing to do when it comes to emerging tech like AI?
It's definitely detrimental to universities, because these changes are permanent. You can't put the genie back in the bottle, and so once you unleash these technologies, if there's easier, faster, more effective ways to teach and to learn, people are going to find their way there. I watch my grandson do everything from the piano to learning chess. And I say to him, where did you learn that? And of course, the answer is YouTube, right? So YouTube is the world's biggest classroom. And let's take advantage of that. And let's figure out how to harness those those technologies and teach in new ways. So I do think it's detrimental. Again, I don't think universities are going to go away, but are they going to be marginalized? Are they going to continue to attract the best and the brightest students because it's the best way to get where you want to go? You know, at Arizona State, the president, Michael Crow, put a really brilliant technologist, Lev Gornick, in as kind of the AI layer across the whole university, because it's not only going to affect pedagogy and curriculum, it's going to affect business processes as well, and student services like advising, right? And everything from what you register for to how you register. I mean, all of these things are going to become extremely affected by AI. That strikes me as a really smart model. And I think the quicker that universities move in that direction, the better.
Yeah, and I think part of that, part of doing that successfully is actually understanding fully what AI actually is. I think right now we're at a very superficial understanding of it, where we think that AI is just for efficiency and should take over our administrative processes. But it's so much more than that, right? It's a cognitive thought partner that can actually change the way that you think and that can actually develop you as a human. But we're not quite there yet in terms of like integration of AI into our ecosystem. Yeah, but hopefully
it's that critical phase of exploration and learning that universities, even though they're all about learning, are really bad at doing, because somehow you don't know exactly what the outcome is going to be, and you might fail, you might get a bad grade, you might, we don't think that way. There's no R&D function at most universities, and there really needs to be. And I think AI has been the most instructive factor for that for me. Although online learning, you could argue, is a similar issue. Something like, I don't know, 30% of the country is already learning online, and you think about the universities that have only dipped their toe into that water and not at all, pursued it. AI is going to be like that on steroids, and I think universities that don't understand that are going to be left behind.
Yeah, and it's also starting to happen already, right? So for students who are not choosing the university path after high school, are realizing that they can get more decentralized credentials across many different institutions. Let's say it's community college or Ivy Leagues or whatever it is, and create their own diploma or create their own sort of course of study that is widely accepted by tech companies, by the most, lucrative careers, things like that. And so if universities are not adopting the online piece, the AI piece, or whatever it is that makes them more agile, then they're going to find that the profits are just going to plummet and they're not going to be able to operate anymore, right? And so there's going to be a reckoning for universities that's coming very soon.
That's the marginalization piece. And, you can already see that in the tech fields, students are being peeled off because, as you say, there are other ways to get credentialed, other ways to demonstrate what they've learned. And that's only the most obvious example. It's going to happen in many other fields as well. And so, the idea of the self-made person, we're all going to turn into polymaths, who who learn on our own, which of course is what happens to you after you leave formal education anyway. And so what the formal education should be about is making you into that agile learner who can learn whatever you need to learn, whether it's from YouTube or wherever. And that's, how you learn is actually more important than what you learn. And the sooner we get to that, I think the better it'll be for colleges and universities.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, I think that's a great point to close out our interview. And thank you so much for your time. Any last words for either, university leaders or professors or teachers or ed tech companies that are trying to break into the market? Any last words for any of those audiences?
Try something new. Try something today that you haven't tried yesterday. Change your mind, because these are times that really call for us all to change our minds.
Totally agree. Thank you, Ann.
All right. Good to talk to you. Be well.